Turns out, the phrase working late downtown has layers I never bothered to decode. Like when your husband says it 3 nights a week for 2 years, what he actually means is maintaining a secret apartment on the 5th floor of your best friend's new building, complete with Whole Foods grocery runs and hand-holding that would make teenagers jealous. I'm Elise Walker, 34, Director of Marketing at a mid-sized tech firm in Charlotte, and up until last Tuesday at approximately 3:47 p.m., I thought I had this whole adulting thing figured out. 8 years married to Calvin, a decent house in the suburbs with the obligatory 2-car garage, weekend brunch routine that involved overpriced avocado toast, and even more overpriced mimosas. The kind of life that looks perfect in Christmas card photos and feels empty in January. But we're not talking about January. We're talking about that specific Tuesday in April when I decided to be a good friend and help Ruby unpack boxes in her new 10th floor apartment downtown. Ruby, my college roommate turned lifelong best friend, had just scored this killer loft conversion in one of those renovated buildings that used to be a textile factory. Very Charlotte. Very trendy. Very about to ruin my entire existence. The unpacking had gone well. We'd spent 3 hours arranging her furniture, debating whether her couch looked better facing the windows or the brick accent wall, drinking wine straight from the bottle because neither of us could find the glasses she'd packed. Classic Ruby. Classic us. I was feeling pretty good about myself, actually. Helpful friend, supportive, present. All those things that women's magazines tell you make you a decent human being. Then I called the elevator to head home. Now, I need you to understand something about elevator rides. They're supposed to be boring. Uncomfortable silences with strangers, awkward eye contact avoidance, maybe someone's phone playing a TikTok too loud. They are not supposed to be the setting where your entire marriage explodes like a piñata filled with lies and expensive organic groceries. The elevator stopped on the 5th floor. The doors slid open with that polite little ding that now haunts my dreams. And there he was. My husband, Calvin Walker, 36 years old, wearing those dark jeans he claims make him look younger, that gray Henley I bought him for his birthday, holding 2 Whole Foods bags in one hand. His other hand? Oh, that was occupied. Fingers thoroughly, intimately, enthusiastically intertwined with a tall brunette who looked like she did yoga every morning and probably had strong opinions about kombucha. They were laughing, not polite laughter, not friendly coworker laughter. That intimate, inside joke laughter that couples have when they think nobody else exists in the universe. They stepped into the elevator, completely absorbed in their little bubble of domestic bliss. She was saying something about forgetting to grab the fancy cheese he liked, and he was teasing her about her addiction to those overpriced grain bowls. It was cute, adorable even. Made me want to vomit directly onto their matching eco-friendly shopping bags. 3 seconds. That's how long it took for Calvin's eyes to drift from her face and land on mine. 3 seconds for his brain to process that his wife, his actual legal wife, was standing in the elevator he'd just entered with another woman on his arm. His face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a horror movie. Red, white, gray, something approaching green. His hand released hers like she'd suddenly caught fire, and he took a half-step backward that would have been comical if my entire life wasn't currently imploding in a descending metal box. But here's the truly beautiful part, the cherry on top of this disaster sundae. The brunette, blissfully unaware that she'd just walked into her boyfriend's worst nightmare, looked at me with mild confusion and whispered to Calvin, loud enough for me to hear in that tiny space, "Who is this? Who is this?" Like I was some random stranger interrupting their Tuesday afternoon romance. Like I was the unexpected element in their equation. Like I was the problem that needed explaining. I watched Calvin's mouth open and close like a fish drowning in air. No sound came out. What could he possibly say? "Oh, hey, honey. Funny seeing you here. This is my girlfriend, Cleo. We've been living together part-time in apartment 5C for the past 2 years while you thought I was working late." The elevator continued its descent. 10th floor, 9th floor, 8th floor. Each ding marking another second of the most excruciating silence I've ever experienced. Ruby's building suddenly felt incredibly tall. Like we were in the Burj Khalifa instead of a converted textile factory in Charlotte, North Carolina. Cleo, bless her clueless heart, was now looking between Calvin and me with growing comprehension. You could literally see the gears turning. His panic. My shock. The way we were both clearly having some kind of moment that didn't include her. "Cal?" she said softly, using a nickname I hadn't heard anyone call him since high school. "What's going on?" 7th floor, 6th floor, 5th floor. The elevator slowed, and for one wild moment, I thought Calvin might actually bolt. Just grab his Whole Foods bags and run like this was some kind of sitcom where problems disappear if you move fast enough. But the doors opened to an empty 5th floor hallway, and nobody moved. We were all frozen. A tableau of suburban disaster. Me in my unpacking day athleisure. Calvin in his casual date night costume. Cleo in her yoga instructor aesthetic, holding organic vegetables like they were going to shield her from the incoming truth bomb. "Elise," Calvin finally managed, my name coming out like a confession. And there it was. Confirmation. Acknowledgement. The end of any possible excuse that this was somehow innocent. Cleo's eyes went wide. "Wait, Elise? You're Elise?" His Elise. Past tense already, apparently. How thoughtful of her to frame it that way. The doors closed. We continued descending. 4th floor, 3rd floor. 2 more floors until ground level, and I still hadn't said a single word. Couldn't, really. My brain was too busy cataloging details. The way their reusable shopping bags matched. How comfortable they looked together. The fact that he was supposed to be in a client meeting across town right now, according to the calendar we shared, that apparently meant nothing. 2 years, I would later discover. 24 months of working late downtown. 730 days of my husband building an entire secondary life in an apartment 5 floors below where my best friend slept. An apartment I would have walked past countless times once Ruby moved in, completely oblivious. The math was already starting to hurt. Ground floor. The elevator doors opened to the lobby with its exposed brick and Edison bulbs and artisanal coffee shop in the corner. The kind of trendy space that's supposed to make you feel sophisticated and urban. I stepped out first. Turned around. Looked at both of them standing there like teenagers caught sneaking in after curfew. "Calvin," I said, my voice surprisingly steady considering my hands were shaking. "I'm going to drive home now. You have until I get there to decide which version of this story you want to try selling me. Choose wisely. I work in marketing. I know bullshit when I see it." Then I walked away, leaving my husband and his girlfriend and their organic groceries in that elevator, probably still trying to figure out how their perfect Tuesday afternoon had derailed so spectacularly. The walk to my car took 90 seconds. The drive home took 18 minutes. And in that time, my shock started transforming into something else entirely. Something sharper, colder, more calculating. Because here's what Calvin had forgotten in his 2-year deception. I don't just work in marketing. I'm good at it. Really good. And if there's one thing I know how to do better than anyone, it's crafting a narrative that people can't look away from. He wanted to play games? Fine. But he'd forgotten who he married. And that was going to be his first mistake of many. The thing about driving home in complete shock is that your brain does this fun little thing where it replays every red flag you ignored for 2 years on a loop. It's like watching a highlight reel of your own stupidity, except there's no popcorn and you're the joke. Calvin's car was already in the driveway when I pulled up. Of course it was. He'd probably broken every speed limit between downtown and our suburban paradise, desperately trying to construct a defense strategy that wouldn't sound completely insane. Good luck with that, buddy. I've sat through enough crisis management meetings to know there's no spin good enough for surprise. I have a whole other life 5 floors below your best friend's apartment. I sat in my car for a minute, watching him through our kitchen window. He was pacing, running his hands through his hair in that way he does when he's stressed, like somehow messing up his hair helps organize his thoughts. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. When I finally walked in, he was standing by the kitchen island, the same island where we'd eaten breakfast that morning, where he'd kissed me goodbye and said he had back-to-back client meetings all afternoon, where I'd reminded him to pick up milk on his way home because we were out. The irony of that milk comment wasn't lost on me now. considering what he'd actually been picking up was organic produce for his secondary household. "Elise, I can explain," he started, which is universally the worst way to begin any conversation that involves betrayal. It ranks right up there with, "It's not what it looks like," and "You're overreacting" in the pantheon of phrases that make you want to throw the nearest object at someone's head. I set my purse down carefully, took off my jacket, folded it over the back of the chair with deliberate precision, let the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable. A trick I learned in negotiations: whoever speaks first loses. He cracked in 45 seconds. "She doesn't mean anything," he said, and I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. The sheer audacity of that statement when he'd clearly been playing house with this woman for longer than some Hollywood marriages last. "Oh, she doesn't mean anything," I repeated slowly, like I was testing out the words to see if they made more sense the second time. They didn't. "The woman you've been spending 3 evenings a week with for 2 years doesn't mean anything. The woman whose hand you were holding like she might evaporate if you let go doesn't mean anything. The woman you're buying groceries with, Calvin, organic groceries from Whole Foods, which we both know costs about 40% more than normal groceries, doesn't mean anything." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I was starting to see a pattern here. "How long have you known?" he finally asked, which was an interesting deflection technique. Make it about my knowledge timeline instead of his betrayal timeline. Classic. "Known? I found out approximately—" I checked my watch with exaggerated precision. 1 hour and 32 minutes ago, when you two lovebirds got on the elevator looking like an advertisement for couples therapy success stories. Before that, I was blissfully ignorant, living my best life, thinking my husband was actually working when he said he was working. Crazy concept, I know. Calvin started the pacing again, back and forth across our kitchen floor that we'd picked out together 3 years ago. Heated debate over whether to go with the gray-veined marble or the white quartz. We'd gone with the quartz. Easier to maintain, he'd said. Less likely to stain. The irony was almost poetic. "It just happened," he said, going for the classic excuse that somehow absolves people of responsibility. Like he'd tripped and fallen into a 2-year relationship complete with a rented apartment and a shared grocery shopping routine. "It just happened," I echoed. "What? Did you trip on a banana peel and accidentally sign a lease? Did you slip and fall into her bed repeatedly over the course of 24 months? Help me understand the physics of how something like this just happens, because I'm fascinated by the mechanics." "Don't be like this," he said, which made me laugh again. That bitter, sharp laugh that surprises you when it comes out of your own mouth. "Like what, Calvin? Upset? Angry? Should I be understanding? Should I offer to meet her for coffee so we can discuss a timeshare arrangement? Maybe alternate weekends? I'll take you Fridays through Sundays. She can have you Mondays through Thursdays, and we'll figure out holidays with a mediator." He had the audacity to look hurt, actually wounded, like I was being unreasonable for not embracing this with open arms and a generous spirit. "Where is she now?" I asked suddenly. "Your Cleo, who apparently doesn't know what a wedding ring means. Is she in your secret love nest wondering what's taking you so long? Did you text her that the wife found out and you need a minute to do damage control?" The way his hand twitched toward his pocket told me everything. He had texted her. Of course he had. "Let me guess," I continued, rolling with the momentum now. "You told her I was crazy, unstable, that we've been having problems for years, that you were planning to leave me anyway, and this just speeds up the timeline. Am I warm? Getting warmer?" His silence was confirmation enough. I walked to the coffee maker, started brewing a cup because this conversation clearly required caffeine. The machine gurgled and hissed, filling the silence while Calvin apparently tried to figure out which version of remorseful husband he should perform. "How did you even meet her?" I asked, genuinely curious now. Because I'm trying to figure out the logistics here. When did you have time to meet someone, date someone, and establish an entire second residence while maintaining the illusion of a normal marriage? "A client event," he admitted quietly. "About 2 years ago. She was doing the graphic design for their marketing materials. We started talking." "Started talking," I repeated, nodding. "And that talking led to what? Coffee? Lunch? Accidentally renting an apartment together? She didn't know I was married at first, he said, which was possibly the worst defense I'd ever heard. I told her I was divorced. Oh, that was rich. That was a whole new level of deception that required planning, forethought, sustained effort. So you've been divorced this whole time and nobody told me? I asked, pressing the heel of my hand to my forehead like I was checking for a fever. That's so inconsiderate. I've been living here, sleeping in your bed, doing your laundry, and you've been divorced. Should I send you a congratulations card? Do Hallmark make cards for surprise divorces? Elise, please. Please what? Please understand? Please forgive? Please pretend this is somehow my fault because you were unhappy? I picked up my coffee mug, wrapping both hands around it even though it was too hot to hold comfortably. The slight burn felt appropriate somehow. When were you planning to tell me, Calvin, or were you just going to keep this up until what? One of you died? Were you planning to split your time between 2 funerals? He slumped into a chair, defeated. Good. He should be. I don't know what I was thinking, he said, which was probably the first honest thing he'd said since I walked in. You weren't thinking, I corrected. That's the problem. You were feeling. And you felt like you deserved 2 lives instead of figuring out how to fix the one you had. You felt like you could have your stable marriage and your exciting girlfriend without consequences. You felt like you were smart enough to pull this off indefinitely. I took a sip of coffee, burning my tongue but not caring. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady now, cold. You're going to sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow, you're going to call a lawyer. A good one. Because this marriage is over. And then, Calvin, then you're going to learn what it feels like when someone you trust looks at you and doesn't recognize who you've become. He looked up at me, something like fear crossing his face. He should be afraid. He'd underestimated me for years, assuming I'd be content with my little marketing job and my suburban routine and my ignorance. But that was his second mistake. His first was thinking he could get away with it. His second was forgetting who he married. And he was about to discover there was a third mistake coming that would make the first 2 look like practice rounds. That night I didn't sleep. Couldn't really. Instead, I sat at my laptop in our home office, the one Calvin never used because he preferred working at the office. Another lie in a catalog of lies that was starting to feel encyclopedic. I started with the basics. Our joint bank account statements going back 2 years. And there it was. A trail of breadcrumbs so obvious I couldn't believe I'd missed it. Monthly payments to something called Riverside Property Management for $1,200. Every single month. For 24 months. I pulled up our credit card statements next. Wednesday evenings, like clockwork. Grocery charges, restaurant bills, even a few purchases from that overpriced home goods store where people buy throw pillows that cost more than my first car. All the evidence of a life being built, funded by our joint finances while I'd been working late myself, completely oblivious. But here's where it got interesting. Really interesting. The apartment wasn't just in some LLC or under Cleo's name. It was listed as a corporate rental through Calvin's company, which meant Calvin had been expensing part of this whole operation as a business cost. Client entertainment, extended stay accommodations for visiting consultants. The creativity was almost impressive if it wasn't so completely illegal. I pulled up his company's employee handbook, started reading through the sections on ethics violations and fraud, made notes, cross-referenced dates. By 3 a.m, I had a timeline that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. My phone buzzed. Ruby. Are you awake? Stupid question. Of course you're awake. I'm coming over. 20 minutes later, she was sitting across from me, still in her pajamas with a coat thrown over them, holding 2 cups of coffee from the 24-hour diner near her place. Talk, she said. So I did. Told her everything. The elevator. The apartment. The 2 years of deception happening 5 floors below where she was about to be sleeping every night. That absolute dumpster fire of a human being? Ruby said, which was mild for her. Ruby had opinions, and she didn't waste time softening them. What are you going to do? I'm going to destroy him, I said simply. But I'm going to do it legally, thoroughly, and in a way that ensures he never forgets what happens when you underestimate someone. Ruby grinned. It wasn't a nice grin. It was the grin of someone who'd been there when I orchestrated a campaign that took down a competitor's product launch in 48 hours. She knew what I was capable of when I put my marketing brain to work. "Tell me what you need," she said. What I needed was information, lots of it, and preferably information that Calvin didn't know I had access to. Ruby, bless her chaotic soul, happened to be friends with the building manager at her complex. Had bonded with him over their shared obsession with true crime podcasts. And building managers, as it turns out, have access to all kinds of interesting information, like lease agreements, and security camera footage, and noise complaints filed by neighbors. By Thursday morning, I had copies of everything. The lease showing Calvin's signature, the rider clauses about the corporate account paying the rent. Even better, I had security footage showing Calvin and Cleo's comings and goings over the past 6 months. Time-stamped, dated, undeniable. But I wasn't done. I called my lawyer. Not our family lawyer, the one who'd helped us with the house purchase. My lawyer. The one I'd met at a women in business networking event who specialized in high-conflict divorces and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. Her name was Marin, and when I laid out everything I'd discovered, she actually laughed. "Oh, honey," she said, "he's handed you everything gift-wrapped. Corporate fraud, misuse of company funds, maintaining a second household on joint marital assets without disclosure. This is going to be fun." Fun wasn't the word I'd use, but I appreciated her enthusiasm. Next stop, Calvin's HR department, but not directly. That would tip him off. Instead, I reached out to an old colleague who'd moved to Calvin's company 2 years ago. Took her to lunch. Casual. Friendly. Mentioned in passing that I was helping Calvin organize some documents for tax purposes and needed clarification on the corporate housing policy. She pulled up the handbook right there at the table. Walked me through the exact requirements for claiming corporate housing expenses, the documentation needed, the approval process, the auditing procedures. Calvin had forged signatures, falsified expense reports, created fake consultant profiles to justify the costs. He'd committed fraud. Actual, prosecutable fraud. And he'd been sloppy about it because he never thought anyone would check. That was mistake number 3, assuming I wouldn't look. Assuming I'd be too heartbroken or too shocked or too dignified to dig through the ugly details. By Friday, I had a file 3 inches thick. Bank statements, credit card receipts, lease agreements, security footage, email chains I'd pulled from our shared cloud storage showing conversations with Cleo about furniture purchases and utility bills, text message screenshots from Calvin's phone that he'd carelessly left logged into our home computer. I photographed everything. Made 3 copies. 1 for my lawyer, 1 for my records, 1 for what was about to become the most memorable corporate event in Calvin's company history. Because here's the thing about working in marketing. You understand optics, you understand timing, you understand how to craft a message that can't be ignored. And Calvin's company anniversary dinner was next Wednesday. A big fancy affair at the country club. Black tie, all the executives, all the department heads. HR would be there. The CEO would be there. Partners would be there. Cleo would be there too. Because according to Calvin's calendar, which he'd stopped being careful about hiding, he'd invited her as his +1 for networking opportunities. The audacity was almost artistic. Ruby helped me prepare the presentation. We spent the weekend at her place, organizing evidence into a clean, professional format. Charts showing the financial timeline, a spreadsheet breaking down every fraudulent expense, photographs of the apartment with timestamps, even a side-by-side comparison of dates when Calvin claimed to be on business trips versus security footage showing him at the apartment building. It was thorough, damning, and presented with the kind of polish that my marketing team usually reserved for major client pitches. "This is beautiful," Ruby said, looking at the final product. "Devastating, but beautiful. You're going to ruin him." "I'm going to let him ruin himself," I corrected. "I'm just providing the documentation." Sunday night, Marin called with interesting news. Cleo, it turned out, had tried to reach out to her own lawyer. Started asking questions about paternity rights and child support. Child support. Cleo was pregnant. I sat down, stood up, sat down again, poured myself a glass of wine that I didn't drink, just held while I processed this new information. How far along? I asked. About 12 weeks according to what she told her attorney, Marin said, which means Calvin's known for at least a month, probably longer. A month? He'd known for a month that he'd gotten his girlfriend pregnant and hadn't said a word to me, had come home every night, kissed me hello, asked about my day, and never mentioned that his entire secret life was about to produce physical evidence in the form of an actual human being. The laugh that came out of me sounded unhinged even to my own ears. Elise? Marin asked. You okay? I'm perfect, I said. Add it to the file. Make sure we have documentation of when he found out versus when he planned to tell me, which, I'm guessing, is never. Already on it, she said. This just keeps getting better. Better wasn't the word I'd use, but it certainly made Wednesday's dinner more interesting. I spent Monday and Tuesday in a weird calm state. Went to work, did my job, smiled at people. Calvin and I barely spoke. He was sleeping in the guest room, leaving for work early, coming home late, avoiding me, probably spending time with Cleo, reassuring her that everything would work out somehow. Wednesday morning, I put on my best dress, the black one with the structured shoulders that made me look like I could run a Fortune 500 company or destroy one, depending on my mood. Pearl earrings, the good heels, professional, untouchable, perfect. Calvin looked surprised when I came downstairs. You're coming tonight? He asked carefully. Of course, I said pleasantly. Wouldn't miss it. It's your company's anniversary. Important night, big celebration. He looked like he wanted to say something. Thought better of it. Nodded. Great, he said weakly. That's great. I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes but looks polite enough in public. It's going to be a night nobody forgets, I promised. And I meant it. The country club looked exactly like every country club in America. Understated elegance that costs a fortune to maintain. Waiters in bow ties carrying trays of champagne that probably cost more per glass than most people's hourly wage. And a room full of people pretending they weren't all secretly comparing their success against everyone else's. Calvin's company had rented out the main ballroom. Round tables with white linens and centerpieces that involved orchids and those curly willow branches that somebody decided were sophisticated. A stage at the front for the evening's presentations and awards. A bar that was already 3 deep with executives getting their drink on before the speeches started. I arrived separately from Calvin, which raised a few eyebrows but not enough to cause real concern. Told people I'd come straight from a client meeting. Easy lie. Believable. Nobody questioned it. Ruby had positioned herself near the back, dressed to kill and ready to document everything on her phone if needed. Moral support and potential witness. She gave me a subtle thumbs up as I walked in. Calvin was near the bar, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo. And there, beside him, was Cleo, wearing a navy dress that probably looked gorgeous before you knew she was sleeping with someone's husband. She had that glow people talk about with pregnancy, that slightly luminous quality that made me want to throw up or throw something. Maybe both. They hadn't seen me yet. I watched them for a moment, the way Calvin's hand rested on the small of her back, proprietary and comfortable. The way she laughed at something he said, touching his arm. They looked happy, normal, like every other couple in the room who hadn't built their relationship on fraud and lies. I got a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Needed something to hold. Something to keep my hands busy so I wouldn't do something impulsive like cause a scene before the main event. The company president, a man named Frederick, who'd always struck me as reasonably intelligent until he'd hired Calvin, took the stage around 7:30, started the evening's program with a speech about innovation and dedication, and all those corporate buzzwords that sound important but mean nothing. Then came the awards, Employee of the Quarter, Sales Team Recognition, the usual corporate back-patting that made these dinners run 2 hours longer than they needed to. Calvin won an award. Of course he did. Outstanding Regional Sales Manager, consistent performance, dedication to client relationships. The irony was so thick you could cut it with the dinner knives they'd provided for the overcooked chicken breast everyone was pretending to enjoy. He went up on stage, accepted his crystal trophy thing, Made a speech about teamwork and commitment, thanked the company, thanked his colleagues, didn't thank me, didn't even glance in my direction. But he did look at Cleo, gave her a small smile that made my blood pressure spike. When he came back to his table, I stood up, walked toward the front. Ruby's eyes went wide. "Showtime." "Excuse me," I said loudly enough to carry but politely enough to sound reasonable. "Frederick, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I have something I need to share with everyone. It's about corporate integrity and transparency. Since those were buzzwords you mentioned earlier, I figured now was the perfect time." Frederick looked confused. Calvin looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Several people around the room shifted in their seats. That uncomfortable recognition that something was about to go sideways. "I'm Elise Walker," I continued, my voice steady and professional. "Some of you may know me as Calvin Walker's wife, but I'm also a marketing professional, and I believe in the power of good presentation. So I've prepared something for you all tonight. Consider it a gift. An educational experience about what happens when personal ethics and corporate policy have a fundamental disagreement." I pulled out a USB drive from my clutch. One of the event coordinators, bless his confused soul, actually helped me plug it into the presentation system. The large screens on either side of the stage flickered to life. "What is this?" Frederick asked, looking between me and Calvin. "A case study," I said pleasantly, "about expense fraud, corporate housing policy violations, and why it's important to actually verify the documentation your employees submit. Calvin, honey, you might want to sit down for this." The first slide appeared. A clean title card. "The Hidden Costs of Dishonesty, a Comprehensive Review." Calvin stood up, started moving toward the stage. "Elise, don't." "Don't what?" I asked innocently. "Don't share public information? Don't present factual evidence? Don't embarrass you in front of your colleagues and your pregnant girlfriend who's sitting at table 7 looking increasingly confused?" Cleo's face went white. Several people gasped. The word pregnant hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite finished exploding. Frederick held up a hand. "Mrs. Walker, I'm not sure this is appropriate." "Oh, it's absolutely not appropriate," I agreed. "Much like maintaining a secret apartment on company funds while lying on expense reports isn't appropriate. But here we are. Shall we continue?" I clicked to the next slide. The timeline. Every fraudulent expense from the past 2 years highlighted in red, dates, amounts, categories. All cross-referenced with Calvin's actual work calendar showing he wasn't where he claimed to be. "As you can see," I narrated, like I was presenting a marketing campaign, "the expenses began approximately 24 months ago. Interesting timing, since that's exactly when Calvin met Cleo at a client event and decided to expand his living arrangements. The apartment in question is located at Riverside Towers, 5th floor, rented through your corporate housing program under false pretenses." Next slide. The lease agreement with Calvin's forged signatures and fabricated consultant information. Here we have the documentation claiming a consultant named Marcus Brennan needed extended housing for a 6-month project that somehow lasted 2 years. Plot twist. Marcus Brennan doesn't exist. But Cleo Brennan does. She's the designer sitting right over there, probably wondering how her boyfriend could afford a downtown apartment on a freelancer's income. Cleo stood up, knocking over her water glass. "Calvin, what is she talking about?" "Sit down," I suggested kindly. "This concerns you too, especially the part about child support calculations which, spoiler alert, are going to be based on Calvin's actual income, not the inflated version he probably told you about." The room was dead silent now, except for the clicking of my advancing slides. Security camera footage showed Calvin and Cleo coming and going from the building, grocery shopping together, looking very much like a couple who weren't hiding anything because they didn't know anyone was watching. "Frederick, I've already forwarded all of this to your HR department and legal team," I said conversationally, "along with documentation of the internal policy violations. I believe the employee handbook is quite clear on fraud and misrepresentation. Section 12, paragraph 4, if anyone wants to look it up later." Calvin had gone gray. Actually gray. Like he'd forgotten how blood circulation worked. "You can't do this," he said weakly. "Already did," I corrected. "Past tense. It's done. And the best part? Everything I've presented is completely factual, documented, legal, unlike your expense reports for the past 2 years. Frederick was now conferring with 2 other executives who'd moved to the front. One of them was definitely from HR based on the way she was looking at Calvin like he'd personally offended her entire department. I advanced to my final slide. A simple statement. Transparency matters. Integrity matters. And karma has impeccable timing. Thank you all for your attention, I said, disconnecting my USB drive and dropping it in Frederick's hand. The full report, including financial calculations of the misappropriated funds, is on there. I believe it totals somewhere around $38,000 over 2 years. But who's counting besides the IRS? I walked off the stage. The room was still frozen in that collective shock where nobody quite knows how to react. Ruby was recording everything on her phone, barely containing her grin. As I passed Calvin's table, I stopped, looked at Cleo, who had tears streaming down her face. For what it's worth, I said quietly, he told me you didn't know he was married. I actually believe that part. So here's some free advice. Get a good lawyer. Make sure the paternity test happens legally. And maybe run a background check on the next guy before you get serious. Then I walked out of that ballroom with my head high and my evidence delivered, leaving behind the wreckage of Calvin's career, his reputation, and his carefully constructed double life. Ruby caught up with me in the parking lot. That was the most savage thing I've ever witnessed, she said, slightly breathless. And I once watched you destroy a competitor's product launch with a single press release. This was more personal, I admitted. My phone started buzzing immediately. Myron calling. Please tell me you recorded that, she said without preamble. Ruby got everything. Perfect. Because Calvin's going to have some very expensive legal problems coming his way. Corporate fraud, potential criminal charges, and now a very public custody situation. He really should have thought this through better. I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. Is it wrong that I feel good about this? Honey, that man stole from you, lied to you, built an entire second life while making you question your reality. Feeling good about exposing the truth isn't wrong. It's healthy. The next morning, Calvin was fired. By noon, the story had spread through Charlotte's business community like wildfire. By the end of the week, 3 other employees had come forward with concerns about his expense reports, and the company had launched a full audit. Cleo reached out through her lawyer, wanted to meet, said she had questions. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. She looked tired, scared, about 4 months pregnant now, showing just enough that strangers probably wondered if she was just bloated or actually expecting. I didn't know, were the first words out of her mouth. I know, I said. And weirdly, I meant it. We talked for 2 hours. She told me her version of the story. How Calvin had pursued her, told her he was divorced, painted a picture of himself as the wounded but hopeful romantic starting over. How he'd been planning to propose next month, had showed her rings. It would have been almost sad if it wasn't so predictable. What are you going to do? I asked finally. Have the baby, she said simply. Make him pay child support. And never trust anyone who can't introduce me to their friends and family again. Fair enough. 6 months after the country club incident that would forever be known in Charlotte business circles as the Walker presentation, I was sitting in my new loft on the 8th floor of a building 3 blocks from where this whole mess started, drinking coffee and reading the finalized divorce decree. The irony of living in a loft conversion wasn't lost on me. Same aesthetic as Ruby's place, same exposed brick and industrial chic vibe, except mine had better natural light and 0 chance of running into my ex-husband in the elevator. I'd made sure of that before signing the lease. Calvin, for those wondering, had moved back in with his parents in Greensboro, a 36-year-old man living in his childhood bedroom because he'd torched his career, his marriage, and his bank account in spectacular fashion. His LinkedIn still said he was exploring new opportunities, which was corporate speak for unemployable after committing fraud at my last job. The divorce settlement had been remarkably simple once the criminal charges got involved. Marin had negotiated from a position of such overwhelming strength that Calvin's lawyer had basically shown up to sign whatever we put in front of him. I got the house, which I promptly sold because living in our suburban paradise felt like inhabiting a museum of my own ignorance. Got 70% of our joint assets. Got to keep my dignity and my sense of humor, which honestly felt like the bigger win. Calvin got debt, unemployment, and a child support obligation that would start the moment Cleo gave birth in 3 months. Speaking of Cleo, she'd become an unexpected fixture in my life. Not a friend exactly, but something adjacent to it. A fellow survivor of Calvin's particular brand of dishonesty. We'd grab coffee occasionally, usually when she needed to vent about the reality of impending single motherhood, or wanted advice on how to extract maximum financial responsibility from the father of her child. He asked if he could be in the delivery room, she told me over lattes one Tuesday afternoon, her expression somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. She was 7 months pregnant now, glowing in that way people claim all pregnant women glow, but really only some do. What did you tell him? I asked. That he could watch it on video after my lawyer approved the footage, she said dryly. He seemed to think we were going to co-parent like some kind of modern family situation. Like I'd forget he spent 2 years lying to both of us. I raised my coffee cup in a mock toast. To men who mistake consequences for persecution. She clinked her decaf against mine. And to women who document everything. The blog I'd started had taken off in ways I hadn't anticipated. Renovating After Ruin. A marketing professional's guide to divorce had started as therapy, a way to process everything by turning it into content. Turns out there were thousands of women who related to the experience of discovering your life wasn't what you thought it was. The podcast had followed naturally. Weekly episodes where I interviewed other women who'd survived various flavors of betrayal and come out stronger. We talked about the practical stuff, lawyers, finances, real estate, but also the emotional archaeology of rebuilding your identity when the person you trusted most had been systematically undermining it. Ruby co-hosted sometimes, providing commentary and keeping me honest when I veered too far into cynicism. She'd moved on from the building where this all started, claiming the energy was cursed, even though we both knew she just wanted a place with better closet space. My marketing career had somehow benefited from the whole disaster. Turns out, publicly destroying your cheating husband's career with a well-crafted presentation makes you memorable in professional circles. I'd gotten 3 job offers in the months following the divorce. Took the one that came with a corner office, a 20% raise, and a team that appreciated someone who understood how to deliver a message with maximum impact. The house sold within 2 weeks of listing. Some young couple starting their journey together, completely convinced their love would be different, better, lasting. I didn't tell them what had happened there. Didn't want to curse their optimism with my experience. Let them figure out their own disasters on their own timeline. I kept the coffee maker, though. Good coffee maker. No reason to abandon quality appliances just because your marriage imploded. Frederick, Calvin's former boss, had reached out a month after the company dinner, apologized for not catching the fraud sooner, thanked me for bringing it to their attention in such a memorable fashion. The company had tightened their expense policies considerably, implemented new oversight procedures, even brought me in as a consultant to help revamp their corporate communications about ethics and integrity. The irony of getting paid to teach Calvin's former company about honesty wasn't lost on anyone. Looking back now, from my 8th floor loft with my successful podcast and my hard-won wisdom, I can almost feel grateful for that elevator stopping on the 5th floor. Almost. Because that moment, as devastating as it was, showed me something crucial. I'd been living half a life, accepting crumbs and calling it a feast. The version of Elise who existed before that Tuesday was smaller somehow, more willing to ignore red flags, more invested in maintaining the appearance of happiness than actually pursuing it. She would have forgiven him eventually, probably. Would have gone to couples therapy and pretended the betrayal could be processed away with enough communication and commitment. This version of me knows better, knows that some things can't be fixed because they were never actually working in the first place. Knows that loving someone doesn't obligate you to tolerate their damage. Knows that the best revenge isn't matching their cruelty, but building something they can't touch or diminish. Calvin texts occasionally. Mostly about practical matters he should be discussing with his lawyer. Sometimes late at night with messages that start with, "I've been thinking," and end with apologies that arrive about 2 years too late to matter. I don't respond anymore. Said everything I needed to say in that country club ballroom with 3 inches of documentation and a room full of witnesses. These days, when I get in an elevator, I smile. Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I've learned something that Calvin never understood. The best stories aren't about the disaster that befalls you, but about what you build from the wreckage. And mine? Mine's just getting started. Turns out, when life gives you a cheating husband and a secret apartment, you don't just make lemonade. You build an empire, document everything, and never apologize for being the protagonist in your own story. The elevator doors close. I press the button for the 8th floor, and somewhere between the lobby and my destination, I realize I'm not angry anymore. Not bitter. Not even particularly sad about what I lost, because what I gained was worth infinitely more. The unshakable knowledge that I'm the kind of woman who doesn't just survive betrayal. I weaponize it into wisdom, turn pain into profit, and never make the same mistake twice. Calvin got his second family, his corporate fraud charges, his unemployed status, and his child support obligations. I got my life back, and that's a trade I'd make every single time.